If you vote for me, all of your wildest dreams will come true.
Welcome, my friends, to the VFX for Motion podcast. You'll see it when you believe it.
Your goal is to make it so that you cross a threshold where you are no longer a line item for the company you work for, but you are something that the company is actually selling. And when you cross that threshold, that is where it begins, your control over your career.
Wow, okay. So I've had the opportunity to talk to some powerfully inspiring individuals on this podcast, and this discussion felt like it was in a class of its own. I love hearing war stories and being inspired by triumphs of talented artists, but I also love getting real about what it actually takes to thrive in the tough business of design, VFX, and post-production. This time, we're doing a roundtable discussion. And like me, both the individuals I'm chatting with have done their time in the trenches and have insights about motion graphics and visual effects, many of them eye-opening. This was the episode where we wanted to get super real about tough topics like commodification, working standards, and why so many artists find this business of post-production too difficult to sustain. If these kind of discussions interest you, and I think they do, I can't wait for you to listen to this one, and I don't have to, because it begins now. So guys, let's do some introductions, and we're going to be talking a lot about career and work stuff, so we don't need A to Z yet. But Adrian, just tell us a little bit about your background to start out.
I'm currently a compositor and VFX supervisor in New York, but the way I got there was originally going to school for English and writing, discovering design at the art department of my college, and getting out and then transitioning from there into video and editing. I worked at an editorial company in Boston, where I'm from originally, and was hired to be their original motion designer because they needed help animating logos and things like that, which is actually where I met Joey. A couple years later, I relocated to New York to pursue becoming a flame artist and bounced around a couple shops doing both After Effects and Flame. I was at Spontaneous for a couple of years and then Superfad for about 5 years. And I just recently finished up a stint at Nice Shoes, where I'd been for about 5 years. And now I'm freelancing again.
So the move from Boston to New York was for Flame and just getting a market that would kind of support doing more. Was it about doing more VFX work, or what took you there really?
A little bit. I mean, I transitioned the place where I worked had a fire, which is, dating myself heavily, but that's sort of the ST version of
the fire that killed Mrs. O'Leary's cow back in 1896.
That's the very one. They had it, which was sort of The Flame suite used to be comprised of a number of different software turnkey systems. Ultimately, all of them conflated into Flame. So yeah, they had a fire, and they had a guy that would do a lot of visual effects work on it, and I kind of got enamored of that a little bit. And I went up to Montreal to do the week-long training at the Autodesk headquarters. And I realized that, like in Boston, the market was small. There was only a few shops there that you could really advance to a certain level of seniority. There wasn't a lot of work really to go around. There are a lot of agencies headquartered there, but most of them took their work out of town. And so I did relocate to New York because that was where the work was going. So I followed the work down to New York.
Excellent summary. Okay, Anthony, over to you. Tell us about you.
Yeah, totally. I got into all of this. I hear this so much. I think I tell people I'm just doing the same thing I've always done. It just happens to be that this generalist title and position that I kind of have now is just a continuation. I would say starting in school, I hovered around the advertising world because I felt like that was a good place for the arts, the music, the ability to think creatively. And it was kind of the white collar excuse to be involved in design and art and all those things. I realized though that the amount of pressure you had to statistically do well, to have your campaigns pay off, and to, I guess, instead of creating, you were more worried about how things performed. Meanwhile, I was at school, I was working as an editor, which that job shifted into doing more motion. And pretty soon that picked up. I became a lead there. I was able to do a sports package 2 years in a row for the network that I was working with. And one thing led to the next. I've worked in LA and New York and now San Francisco. And I've kind of just said goodbye to the ad world, and I'm just more about wanting to just create beautiful work. But coming from that background of like editing and broadcast and things like that. I very early on had to adopt a lot of the visual effects mindset. You're always dealing with live footage and things. So that's been a part of my story from very early on. And yeah, here I am now in San Francisco, working at a great place called Swordfish right now.
So I'm curious about the white collar comment. So that sounds like a family, that would be like what your family's telling you about what you should do. And did you mention where you went to school?
I went to BYU, and definitely the whole white collar excuse. I think we're in America, like art and anything to do with doing anything outside of doctor, lawyer, straightforward science, objective, thinking, like the creative arts, like obviously you're not going to do that for your career. You can do that for your side passion projects and things. And so I felt like advertising was a great way to justify and legitimize, going against the flow of what everyone else was doing. Yeah, I went to school at BYU, actually, which is a very interesting experience and another topic. But they actually had a fantastic broadcast setup. They have a top-notch, it's like a broadcast company separate from BYU. They're able to stream 3 live separate venues, whether it's a football, soccer, whatever it may be, remote and or at their own stadiums, a huge production facility with like 5 stages, just tons and tons of money. So it was a really great opportunity for me to get integrated into a really great broadcast environment.
That's so cool. I think I've heard that before about BYU for whatever reason. But yeah, it's so funny. Come on, mom and dad. I mean, 21st century lawyers, are they? Okay, anyway, let's move on. So what we're doing over here at School of Motion is creating this course for motion designers who are listening to this after we edit and distribute it. And we are focused on live action. So here we are staring at the 3rd decade of the 21st century. And I'm curious what you see, each of you, as similarities and differences between what we would call the visual effects business and what we call motion design. And Anthony, you alluded to this a little bit, so go ahead.
Sure. Coming into the next phase of motion design, I feel like we're always getting pushed to do more, faster, and when I say more, I think like the breadth, like the amount of the different type of projects that we're dealing with. We're expected to handle all sorts of data that is involved with how our project is going to be completed. And when I say different types of data, I mean like very early on, at least in my career, I recognized the need to, I need to integrate this shot with this live action footage. I need to create something that seamlessly moves with the motion from one scene into a full CG environment, or I need to track this or that, or I need to fix or remove something there. You're always dealing with different types of shape data, different type of tracking, the best ways of tracking, the best ways of integrating. And there's always this marriage needed, at least for me, and continues to be the case in my type of work. I mean, I find myself constantly going back and forth between things like Synthesize, Mocha, Cinema 4D, After Effects, and constantly needing to manage those different inputs and recognize this shot, I need these 4 or 5 pieces of data. I need camera data, I need shape and roto, I need to be able to track and clean this up. And I think that tool set and mentality opens up your After Effects and your 3D workflow in a way that just sticking only to design and only to storytelling or only to 3D animation, if you're not involved in integrating those type of things, I feel like you'll be faced with the hard reality in the future that you're expected to manage a lot of those type of shots, even though you're not a VFX artist.
That's interesting. Yeah, it's hard. I mean, you can be an editor and not be very technical. It's harder to be a CG anything, animator, motion design artist without being somewhat technical. But that said, certain people go a long time without getting into whole huge parts of the tool set. So that's a keen observation. So Adrian, since you've been at a few different levels and senior enough to be supervising, in addition to your take on VFX versus motion design, I'm sort of interested in your take on people you've hired and, what we'll get into that a little bit, but give us your take overall.
Yeah, I mean, picking up on what Anthony said, I agree. I think that given the state of the industry now, everyone's being asked to do more with a little bit less. And there seems to be this sort of a natural assumption that if you can do one thing, you can do other things as well. On the other hand, I do agree with you, Mark, that if you are doing a certain kind of a work for a very long time and that you've just never butt up against having to do a green screen key or, comp something in so that, it looks fully integrated into a live action plate, and that's not necessarily the work that you're interested in doing, you can go a very, very long time without having to do that. For the people that we work with and that I've brought on for teams, I certainly like it when people have their hands in a lot of different disciplines, because it means that, I don't fully expect them to be experts at all of it. I usually expect them to be good at the main task we're bringing them in for, but to have an understanding of, perhaps the process that comes just before them or just after them means that we're not going to have any problems with integrating them into a larger pipeline for whatever show we're working on. And I think that's one of the things where I see design shops and, some VFX studios starting to resemble each other, is that as the scope and scale of the projects they take become bigger, the need for a strong pipeline where everybody understands all of the pieces that are going to put a final product together, that becomes more necessary.
Yeah. In my experience, in the VFX world, and I'm talking now about really the large scale kind of assembly line type of effects environment where you're working on a feature or something big, there are shot turnovers, and our artists tend to be told, your work is, so to speak, cut out for you. You're told kind of what needs to happen. And motion design often is a little bit more like, hey, work your magic.
Exactly.
here's the style frame, or here's kind of where they're going, if even that. Or sometimes it's just like, they have no idea, but we need to plus this up because it's just not working as it is, In my experience, the VFX artist would really hit a blank page, and it's pretty rare to get artists out of the VFX world who could get past that and work that way. Mm-hmm. And on the MoGraph side, and I'm stereotyping here, but on the MoGraph side, sometimes the technical chops would just not be there with, doing X or Y. And it's clear which problem's easier to solve. I'm just curious if that jibes with your experience as well, or, does that kind of seem current?
Yeah, I think so as well. I think one of the things that we wrestle with, at least on the VFX side, is trying to get into the process way earlier than we are usually asked to be. A lot of times we'll, and from looking back in my own career, like, as you say, clients will come in and go, we've got an idea, but go ahead and give us some mood boards, give us some boards, conceptualize, create. We'll work together, sort of partner up here a little bit, in the best of situations. On the VFX side, a lot of times they've already shot something and they've come and been like, this may have been shot wrong, but see what you can do with it,
Fix it in post.
Exactly. And for us, it was always like, we always felt like there was a law of diminishing returns the further away we got from, the point in time where something was actually shot. In an ideal world, we want to get in earlier, even before the shoot, potentially have someone on set, or at least have lengthy conversations with the director on what his intent for shots are, while they're still in the planning stages. But yeah, so I definitely agree. Where we come in, how far a job has gestated, there's definitely a difference between where I find some designers come in and where the VFX artists come in.
Coming from the motion and from the design world and being closer usually to that creative process. Usually when you are involved with something that you do need to marry some visual effects, you need to marry some CG with some footage, you need to tell a story and integrate it on that level. VFX is kind of the gateway to leveling up and taking charge. And if you're able to kind of own that pipeline and that process, even from a one-man band up to being able to lead others, usually it's a great way, I think, for artists to be able to take more senior level positions, because you're able to, one, think and design because you are from the motion background, but you're also able to establish some process and some pipeline and get other artists up and going. I think that's really freeing and liberating. At least for me, that's been a way that I've been able to act as VFX soup on several projects in my career. That's coming from, at times, my role may be just artist. At times, I'm art director. Other times, I'm literally on set and I've established how it's going to work and what the actual creative is going to be. So I feel it's a very exciting, instead of being like a VFX cog on the other side where it's all handed to you, we get both freedom creatively to come up with the ideas, but then the freedom also to figure out your pipeline and process and establish that. And doing both of those is pretty exciting.
That's a really exciting reframe you just did there. That's great. All right, let's talk about the business a little bit. We work in a long hours, unstandardized pay scale, difficult work-life balance kind of world. And various people find their ways to deal with that. There are a lot of strategies. I mean, there are strategies that will reduce your workload, often by specializing in something very sought after. You can call the shots a little more. Or I'm curious about your strategies personally relative to the way the business works and just how you found it, especially, let's say, even over the time you've been working, like if anything's shifted.
I think every artist, as you begin, I think the dark side of our industry, where because we are doing something that is creative and we all say that we're passionate to some level, and it's completely overused on all of our profiles and things, but like the passion that we actually do have is used against us lots of times. And that's kind of the dark side that you're referring to. And I feel like that's actually a good thing in the beginning. I think it is great to go hard and to go long and to spend some late nights and weekends in your first phase of your growth period. I feel like that's okay and that's fine. But there comes a point where you start to realize you need to have some personal boundaries. And I think for me, after going to LA and seeing a really great shop work, it was just an incredibly well-oiled machine. It was at Cake Studios down in Burbank. It was a chance to see things just running perfectly, near perfectly. Going to New York from there, the New York culture and lifestyle, at least at the shop I was at, and this is typical of ad agencies, I was brought onto an ad agency to actually expand their VFX and their 3D capabilities. And so that growth was kind of at my expense, I felt. I only lasted probably a year and a half in New York because I remember so many taxi drives home. The majority of my taxi rides, I feel like I was looking at the sunrise.
Wow, yeah.
Driving back up to the Upper East. I realized that I needed to set some personal boundaries. And in doing so, finally, after a 10-page letter, the thing, talking and going over like what needs to happen, I realized that I needed to move on, that the people I worked with were actually wonderful people, but in order to outlast the growth period and the transitional phase of adopting, and even though we brought on more people, it would be at my expense, the actual full growth of pushing that department out. It'd be on my shoulders. So I decided to go to the West Coast, where I'm from, actually. I think freelance was a great way for me to get myself into a phase where I felt, instead of being, I had gone through the growth phase where you're somewhat of, I would say, a bitch. We might have to edit this.
No.
where you initially are enslaved. You have no overtime and your value is a lot lower. I think as a full-time employee in your growth phase, I realized in transitioning from a full-time employee to freelance, all of a sudden my value for my time was respected on a level that I had never seen and never had imagined.
Yeah, sure. They're going to have to ask you again.
I mean, they're paying you so much more, and your time is precious, and they know it, and they're not going to pay for overtime unless they really want to. So it's a new dichotomy, a new kind of business model for yourself. And that was a great way to learn how to work faster for the most part. Even if you ended up having some late nights here and there, you're incentivized not to. And for me, work-life balance was solved to a certain extent by transitioning to freelance. And at times where I did have to go really hard, where I did 2 weeks straight and 16-hour days to finish the project up, which we all have stories like this, you can take some time off. And I feel that's a really great ebb and flow. And then I think also in freelancing, you get a chance to taste some different shops, some different cultures, some different overall just mindsets that different companies have. And that's why I'm at Swordfish now, because it was the favorite flavor of the many here in the city. And it's just your time and your abilities, but more or less your schedule and creative freedom was very valued here. So I think that's a great 3-step phase for a lot of artists, where you work hard, you're full-time, you might be enslaved a bit. Transitioning to freelance changes drastically your schedule, the business model, the whole incentivization of time. And I think once you freelance a lot, your perspective changes quite a bit and you can pick and choose from there. I would say work-life balance, for me at least, that recipe I would fully support and push onto other younger artists.
Yeah, a couple of observations about that before I let you go, Adrian. The thing that you laid out at the beginning, Anthony, it's really a fundamental thing. I mean, creative people versus capitalists, they are at odds. I mean, creative people will always want to make it better and keep working on it, at least until it doesn't upset you. You don't want to put something out that's like, no, it's not right yet. And it's like, that's part and parcel of being one of those people. And that is just not, just look at it. If on a system that's based on efficiency and productivity, it's at direct odds. And there are definitely ways around that. Another one that you didn't mention that can work on the freelance side is if you're proactively providing something that you're good at, and it's often something that's in the I can make something from nothing category. So well sought after concept artists and matte painters and people who are but on the VFX side, and then on the design side, it's somebody with a very particular, say, style or thing that they do. That's sometimes also a way around, although you're probably not going to get out of working long hours at times. That's always part of it.
Yeah, I think you both make some good points. I always tell people starting out that, this industry, it's something of an abusive relationship from the get-go. It'll take whatever you're willing to give it and then continue to ask for more. So I have found over the course of my career, and as I've gotten older, that the industry itself doesn't necessarily change, but your priorities for yourself do, and they do without you almost realizing it. So as Anthony said, when you're younger, you absolutely should be going hard. But I think that also, there's a distinction to be drawn between building your career and maintaining it. To build it, it's going to require a lot of effort at the beginning. To maintain it, it's still going to require a lot of effort, but at that point, you can begin to advocate for yourself and push back and create boundaries, and those are important. I have found that nowadays I look for shops and for clients and for projects that from the get-go sort of respect those involved in creating it and also don't look to try to kill you. I try to stay away from, the movie, the feature film pipeline, is not something I'm ever interested in because I know it will destroy me. To go back a little bit, talking about, whether or not freelance is good versus staff, I always feel at the very beginning that starting out in a staff position to learn the sort of the ins and the outs of the industry and the business is invaluable before going freelance. And you are right, though. You do get sort of squeezed a little bit when you're staff because, your deal is in place and you can't come back and go, I charge overtime at this amount of time. But you also do find yourself, and I put this out there just for anybody who might be listening to this, you do have a tendency to get put into better projects because you're there and you're not being brought in late in the game. But when you are a freelancer, you do need to be sort of romanced a little bit by different companies because they need to be very mindful of how they treat freelancers because word gets around, everybody talks, and when the project's done, if they want you back, they don't want to burn you out. But for me, I've learned to lay some groundwork or some ground rules with companies I work at. Obviously I've got a young child and, there are times I need to duck out, but, you negotiate that up front and, I usually drop my kid off early. So I get in an hour early. So sometimes I could leave a little bit early. But I have learned, and the most important thing is that you should not be afraid to ask because rare is the company, and they're out there that are actively looking to make sure you're okay,
Yeah, it's funny that family does make that a little easier because I haven't ever worked. I've worked at some places that were pretty tough, but I've never worked at a place where you couldn't say, hey, my kid is sick or needs to be picked up from school or go to the doctor or whatever. And they'd be like, no.
Yeah.
Here.
Yeah. They'll greet, they'll look at you, but
right.
What are you going to do?
You're still going to have to get the work done somehow.
Exactly.
But you're taking time for what you got to do. Let's step back because that's actually segues really well. So the thing that staying away from the feature film VFX pipeline and being used and abused when you're just starting out have in common is commodification. And for an artist just starting out in the world, the Gen Zers out there, you're staring at, a world of Fiverr and 99 designs and this kind of thing of people, asking you to do stuff for free. I mean, we all know the tropes, and it's generally kind of, again, it's a common confusion that has to do with the system. I don't know. It seems like certain jobs, because they're not in that, wow, you made me something nobody else could do category. It's like, well, can I just have that for free, or could you just do it faster or whatever? And Anthony, I actually thought of bringing you on this podcast because something really interesting you had said about when we were just chatting at lunch one day about when you were in LA and you thought about picking up Nuke and going down that road. And you're like, no, I did not want to be in that category. And that I thought that was really fascinating. You want to say a little bit about that?
Yeah. I think part of the reason why is, there's an intrigue to like this high level way of working. Some of the great inspiring movies that you see all of the behind the scenes, and you're constantly seeing these amazing Nuke setups, and there's a lot of intrigue behind that, but it's almost like this mistress. It's you look at these, you look at the pay rates and the hours and the overall VFX industry, which is, this is all, like, everyone knows this. It is just a broken industry. Mm-hmm. And to be working on that, it's almost like you're selling your soul. There's so much, I would say, creative freedom. I think I said this earlier. You're going to get so much more creative freedom and so much more respect as far as your life energy and what that's worth into putting your life's work into a project. The return that you're going to get in the motion design world, even if you want to tap into visual effects, I would say it's not worth going into the film or the VFX industry itself. It would be far more better use of your time for sake of creative freedom, for sake of just like overall happiness, staying in motion. Because in the end, if you're stuck on Nuke, people are going to be telling you exactly what to do, and you'll be making half the pay. So yeah, just run.
Yeah. I've heard the metaphor that, like, working on a feature film in Nuke, it's like being in the Russian army, going up against Germany, and each soldier who falls hands his copy of Nuke to the next soldier behind him.
Well, I mean, that speaks more to the business model than the software platform a little bit. I mean, I spend most of my time in Nuke these days. I love Nuke, but I totally understand what you're where you're going at.
Well, no, and that's exactly so perfect. So yeah, it's not the tool that's getting commodified. It's a certain kind of artist who's being asked to, you take it from here. I mean, because that's a really good point.
There, on the VFX side of things, Nuke has become actually just quite more like sort of the go-to platform for VFX as opposed to Flame, because it's easier in general to ramp up and down teams. Flame Suite the prices come down considerably, but historically it was very expensive to run a Flame room, given all the things that kind of went along with it. But a Nuke station is essentially just a very fast box and like a $6,000 license for Nuke, and for that reason, and you can rent them by the month, so you can scale up and down teams as you need them. So they people can run effects jobs a lot more nimbly by turning to Nuke as opposed to Flame, because you're not sitting on these giant machines and long licenses that go along with them. So that being the foundation, at least the way the New York market's working, there's two worlds through which Nuke artists travel. The first is the standard like VFX feature film and television pipeline, and that's sort of where the notion of the squeezed Nuke artist comes. You've got these big rooms of people just sort of working, and the budgets are not always great, and the pay is not as high as it used to be, but they kind of counter that by the length of the booking. So if you've got your rate, they might ask you to lower it a little bit, but on the flip side, they're going to give you like an uninterrupted 3-month booking. And when freelance has its own sets of ups and downs, that might be, viable for someone to accept. But on the other side, you've got the commercial side of things, which has always been, at least for a VFX artist, a little bit more profitable, but the work is not always as forthcoming historically. So you might have, if you're a freelancer, you might have like an off week or an on week. That, where these two worlds kind of collide, is where schedules work up. Because if you're running commercials and you want to hire a Nuke artist, you're going to get a commercial probably about maybe 2-3 weeks out before you have to start a job. At that point, you start staffing up for it. And when you start looking around for nuke artists, they're hard to find because a lot of them have been gobbled up by the episodic market, which books nuke artists for like 3 months at a time. So when you're working on a commercial, you land a big commercial, you got to get some nuke artists, like they are hard to find because they've all been booked and people are sitting on them for months. So if you were a nuke artist, and this is where I bring it around full circle in New York, and you were decided that you are not the episodic kind of person, you'd like to stay in the commercial world, you will get your full rate and you will constantly be booked because there is a demand for the available nuke artist working in a commercial VFX pipeline. So it's a big ecosystem, but at least in the New York market, there is absolutely no shortage of work for nuke artists. Now, all of this is beneath operating at like a slightly lower tier than the horribly caustic VFX feature film industry, which, that's where most of the VFX artists and the people who get like just crushed by it, like that's where all the stories come out from. And I personally am staying very clear of that. But, again, and we're operating on different coasts here, but like on the New York market for a VFX nuke person, like you will always be working one way or another.
This is really interesting because, I also have to defend VFX a little bit, even feature film effects, in that, pivoting off what you were just saying, Adrian, because I think that was really well put and very insightful. And actually, I'd never looked at it exactly that way, the punch card versus, and the other side of punch card is design. It is still,
absolutely.
If you're a matte painter, you are a designer. It's really, you might have specialized in something that's going to cater more to feature films, the number of motion design shops that are going to need a matte painter, it comes up, but it's not necessarily the same deal as guaranteeing on a given show that they're going to have 60 matte paintings or what have you. But that is, again, it's that thing I said about being able to create something from nothing, or even giving the perception that you're doing that. And unfortunately for VFX, this is back to the Life of Pi Ong Lee episode, where it was, it was a company going to the Oscars as they're going bankrupt, and Ong Lee saying, well, I'd like to just be able to buy a tiger effectively. Like, I would like to just be able to purchase a tiger for my shot. And it's like, there's a misunderstanding that the tiger is not a commodity.
Exactly.
It's an artwork.
Yeah. Absolutely. And just to interject, because I since you weren't finished with your point, but I remember that speech and hearing about Ang Lee. And I still remember, if you go back, if you've watched Ang Lee's Hulk movie and watched the special features, all the behind the scenes stuff, the original pitch session at ILM, when he goes in and says everything that he wants, and you can see everybody around the table being like, you can't do all of this. And then it cuts to like a talking head of him being like, yeah, I don't really know how any of this works. Apparently I asked for too much. And it's like, oh, Ang, if only you knew what you were going to do a couple of years later. You're killing us all. But it's an interesting refresher to go back and watch that, because you can see it starts there,
Yeah.
But anyway, continue.
No, it's fine. I think actually, let's flip this around. I'm curious, so what's the sustainable model look like? Like what, and you can talk about your own career, Adrian, I'll start with you, or you can talk about other people you've known who've pivoted or not, or found their thing. In this whole world of CG post, including design, who are the happy people?
I actually find that, there used to be a certain amount of overhead required, which served as a gateway to get into visual effects, if that makes sense, right? Like in the days that predated Nuke, when Flame and Inferno were those are the industry standards, the price point of getting onto one of those boxes that were specifically designed to handle the intense demands of standard definition video in real time. And I'm dating myself again. You needed to get into some of these big shops, that could pay for those, and then also attract the artists and the work that could justify how much it was costing to run those machines on a daily basis. Nowadays, not so much. People will talk about how much, a Nuke license is compared to an After Effects license, but a Flame used to cost, a couple $100,000, right?
Right. And you'd have to pay an annual fee to keep it going.
Exactly. Too. And your maintenance costs. And then you needed all the decks and all this other stuff. And with digital delivery now, it's easier to get into this if you are a smaller team. And I see the cracks in the walls of the old post facility model happening. And anybody who's running one of those shops is probably really feeling the pain right now. However, the studio I'm working at right now is just, it's a a bunch of people that collectively pay about $3,000 a month for a room in sort of like a warehouse space. They don't entertain clients. They work remotely. All of their freelancers oftentimes are in other states. They share files via Dropbox, and they have a small server and a few Nuke licenses, and they just churn out work. They deal directly with the clients on their own. They stay clear of agency work, and they're doing great stuff, and they feel like they're in control of the entire process. And when you are in control of your life, you are happy. And it's sort of a new model that's sort of gained traction. But when you talk about shrinking budgets, they're always going to shrink. And you can talk about how outsourcing is a major problem, and it's a major problem for, again, someone who's got a load of overhead. But if you're running a tight business model, you can deal directly with people, even doing visual effects shots for television shows. If it's just you and two other guys, you're getting paid comparatively a heck of a lot of money compared to someone that's got to keep lights on in a 3-floor facility. So I think that's a very sustainable model now. And the studio I'm working at, I should mention who they are. It's a Henchman. Website is henchman.nyc. And they do very, very good work. And it's been a joy to work there, and quite a departure from what I've been used to for most of my career.
Let's close it out by talking about skills, which is what people in my course are building. And so let's talk about raising your value in the marketplace to people who want to employ you. What are some of the best ways you've seen to do that, or that you yourself have done for that? We've kind of touched on them, but
Sure. Well, I think I had a bit of a unique experience in the sense that I came from such a heavy broadcast background where from day one, that was something I needed to develop. And the type of things that I needed to develop, software and skills, I would say like the ability to track 2D and 3D point tracking, getting into Mocha early on where you're doing planar tracking, figuring out the best ways to rotoscope, finally getting out of After Effects and into Mocha to start doing that, to really get some more refined processes for getting those shapes and things figured out. I would say that as far as the 3D side of things, the ability to start learning how to capture lighting from sets, planning that out from the beginning, going on and this guerrilla mentality where you need to be able to go start to finish on whether it's a 2D or 3D object integrated into your scene, figuring out how to do your lighting. And I used to do mirror balls. Nowadays, you can do things as easy as like you can literally just get a full HDR off some of these 360 cameras. The Ricoh Thetas.
Does it bracket too?
There's an app you can get that'll bracket, yeah.
Oh, okay. It's good to know.
There's a couple of them that you can get. Like even Grayscale Gorilla has one for like $10. Mm-hmm. But you can get up to 9 exposures, I think, on the Ricoh and get a full HDR setup. Essentially, just figuring out all of the different things that you need to do to get a shot fully done and composited so that it is integrated with live footage very early on just helps, I think, every part of your creative process. And I think that very much opens up the type of work that you can do as an artist. And I think that's a great gateway to leveling up in your seniority. I think a lot of people that are able to manage those different things in that pipeline, you end up getting to define a lot of those processes and pipelines for different studios that you find yourself at. So I would say getting your hands onto Cinema, onto Synthize, Mocha, learning how to HDR bracket, really pushing all those things to get a final render that's integrated lighting-wise and tracking-wise is invaluable.
Yeah, and I just want to throw out for anybody who doesn't know about bracketing, because we haven't really raised that in the course directly, that's basically making an HDR by taking an ordinary camera and a series of images at different light levels and combining them, which even the iPhone is starting to do.
Yeah, it's amazing.
So Adrian, what's your take?
Yeah, I think, well, what I always tell people starting out, I guess there's 2 ways you can approach it. If you're asking about if leveling up at your shop, when you first start out, your first goal is to prove yourself to be an asset to your company and let them know that they are, let's see, there was an assistant editor that I told once, your goal is to make it so that you cross a threshold where you are no longer a line item for the company you work for, but you are something that the company is actually selling. And when you cross that threshold, that is where it begins, your control over your career. The way you do that is by proving yourself to be an underutilized asset as opposed to just someone filling a role, right? You talk about the commodifications of services, but you also don't want to be a commoditized individual, meaning if you're a guy making coffee in the morning and doing coffee runs, anybody can do that. You want to be a person that your company is looking at and going, that guy is wasted or that girl is wasted making coffee. We need to get them onto a box.
Right.
That is your first goal. Well, how you do that is by obviously like get in touch with the actual artists and get as much shadow time as you possibly can with the people doing the work that you want to do. I always tell people, yeah, there's so many different options here. If you're a motion designer, you're interested in visual effects, there's a lot of different types of visual effects. What you want to do is find the thing that doesn't seem like work to you, the thing that seems the most fun, because that's going to be the thing you naturally find time to develop. I have a lot of people saying to me like, I know After Effects, should I learn Flame? Should I learn Nuke? And I go, you got to do the one that when you sit down, go, I would do this all day if I could. Because if it's something that you think you should learn versus something you want to learn, you'll get better faster at the thing you want to learn than the thing that you think you should learn.
Yeah, that's a great point.
Yeah, it really is.
To change tacks a little bit here, and we talk about the idea of motion design versus design for visual effects versus visual effects itself. There's a distinction, I think, to be made between the idea of design itself as something that you're making something to look artistic and pretty. And that's sort of the nature of design. There's communication that runs through all of it. Design is art with intent, as Milton Glaser once said. Motion design, you have a message you're trying to communicate. You want to communicate it in the most elegant and aesthetically pleasing way possible. The goal of visual effects is oftentimes to make something look real. It's a slight distinction, but it's an important one, I think. And so I would say if you're interested in visual effects and the idea of compositing and taking the things that you've designed and animated and making them fit with a shot plate or a piece of CG, start looking, as Anthony mentioned, to the world around you. Understand how light works. Pick up a camera and understand photography. I wish that I started out in design myself. I wish I had learned cameras way earlier than I did. And the differences between different lenses.
You're talking about a camera that would be like a DSLR,
Yeah,
Micro Four
absolutely.
Thirds, something within a separate lens, and yeah.
Yeah, I mean, you can shoot anything you want on an iPhone and you can track that. That's great. But when you understand, like, ultimately you'll get to a point. The end game is like you'll be standing next to a director and they're like, we're going to swing a lens and, switch to a 70 mil on this. And, you got to understand like, all right, well, what's a 70 as opposed to a 50? What's that going to do here?
And how does it differ depending on what the camera is?
Absolutely. Absolutely. So and again, that's a long journey, but the further you get down that road, the more you will be expected to know things that on the surface seem like they have nothing to do with the art you're trying to create. There's a bedrock of foundational rules that are in place that are absolutely 100% immovable when it comes to delivering video for television versus delivering video for a projection versus delivering video for, web is the easiest, right? Because you can make it wherever you want. But, After Effects has color spaces that you can set, and I am surprised by the amount of people that don't ever set them.
Yeah, it's so complicated for most studios to even dip their toe into that.
It's true. But if you, like, for instance, like as you step into a bit of a VFX pipeline, especially coming from After Effects, which can oftentimes be a very insular program, you can do whatever you need to do between Cinema 4D and After Effects and then render it. And as long as that render is finished and not going anywhere else, a lot of times you can think to yourself, oh, yeah, this is great, I'm fine. But if you're handing that off to like a Nuke artist who's going to do something to it and then hand it back to you, Nuke and also Flame think about the way colors are set in a very specific way. And you can get in and out of After Effects without ever thinking about that.
That's an important point to start to really learn the color spaces. And I think you do definitely get very frustrated. There's a lot of love for After Effects, but I think when you are dealing with VFX type projects, being familiar with those spaces and realizing how much sometimes After Effects can sometimes hold you back or compromise on some things. Being aware of those things it's key. A lot of times you do long for some of those features and that control.
Well, and let me bridge that a little bit, because at one level, the features are there in After Effects, which is what Adrian's saying, but the pitfalls to using them incompletely, because I think when they were added, and I'm talking about 32-bit linear light and everything to do with color management, it was based and it envisioned a system that had gone into place with print at Adobe.
Right.
And they were replicating that for video, but it's an incomplete pipeline, because if you're not in the world of Nuke, which is completely based around this and relies on it, you're stuck with like rendering, like what can you render that's color managed, like Targa's Photoshop file. I mean, there's only certain files that are going to participate in this universe. Sure, DPX, but DPX is not current common currency in After Effects land. So it's a kind of a broken, incomplete system. And Adrian, I'm guessing you've probably had to train up people who had never encountered the need, right?
Absolutely.
So how does that work?
Well, it's sort of, I mean, I sometimes equate it, and this is sort of, I describe a little bit of when you first open up After Effects, you want to animate, right? Like you want to just make something. And a lot of times people skip over the technical production, very, good production tool features in After Effects. The same way, like when you get your first guitar, you just want to learn how to play a song, and many people just learn how to play songs, but never really learn the theory. It's somewhat analogous. Now, I mean, years ago, I ran into this because we were getting footage from editors, and then we would animate on top of it and then hand the footage back to the editor, and the editor would go, the color shifted. Why did the color shift? And that made me have to go back and figure out exactly why. And that's when I learned all the color space stuff. Nowadays, when people come in, I go like, look, there's the short thing and the long thing. The short thing is open up color profile, set this to HDTV Rec 709, close it and work. Just do that. Every project you make, you do this. If I find that you haven't done that, we're going to have problems. And then after about sometimes they'll come and immediately ask me, but like a few days later, I'll go back and go, all right, I'm going to tell you why. Because I was working at, Superfat and also Nice Shoes that had color, departments built into them, and they that matters to them. So
everything's calibrated too.
Right.
Yeah.
So, there's the short training and the long training, but I'm always happy when I see people kind of go, oh, I never really knew what that did. And then they go and try to figure it out on their own. But I think that After Effects is at a bit of a disadvantage, especially as you say, when it comes to dealing with linear, which After Effects as a legacy program predates linear color spaces or scene linear. And they cannot inject a fully operational linear workflow into After Effects without like decimating every legacy project that's been made for like the last 20 years. Nuke had a good advantage because they built that program specifically to work in linear. Doesn't work in anything else. So problem solved. But when you're dealing with a program that was made in 94, 95, like there's a lot of old projects that will just be broken if they go, hey, we're switching all the color spaces and everything is color managed now.
Well, not to mention the panic that would ensue.
Oh, of course. Because so much is why
are you doing this to us?
Yeah, exactly. And just, really briefly as an aside, and it's somewhat relevant, but it's also a deep rabbit hole to speak about, I don't know if you speak about scene linear in your course, but scene linear is a sort of a color range that is designed specifically to replicate the way light and color work in the real world, as opposed to how it's been replicated for older model televisions and augmented over the years. And they've sort of built Band-Aid on top of Band-Aid on top of Band-Aid. And every time they went from SD to HD and from HD to 4K and from 4K to high dynamic range television, they kind of tweak the system a little bit, release a new color profile, and then move on. Linear sidesteps all of that. But when you find out, or when you look at how some of the best 3D compositing out there is done in linear, because it replicates the way things actually look to the human eye. And when you set something to like a transfer mode to add, when you're dealing with something
when
that's
it's
not
literally mathematically adding.
Yeah, and it's just like it blows everything out. When you switch to scene linear and you hit add and you take a fire plate and just switch it on and put it on something and go, or a fire plate, like some stock footage of fire on black and hit add, it's like, oh, wow, that actually looks like fire looks like in the day. It's computationally correct.
Yeah, it's actually a one-to-one as opposed to some sort of compromise where it's throwing a curve.
Yeah, and here's a case, for example, with After Effects, where they've actually kind of fixed that over time. Like add used to be unusable because it was gammed up, and then they changed behind the scenes but never told anybody. And it's kind of like, I mean, they told people who knew enough to ask, but it's kind of like how After Effects handles, edge multiplication. It's just like, we don't want you to worry about this. We're going to handle it. And most people appreciate that. And again, I mean, with color, it all comes back to the fact that your monitor is lying to you.
Yes,
your
100%.
Monitor itself is gammaing up your images to show them to you. And that's kind of, until you kind of can wrap your head around that, it's really hard to understand any of it. And so After Effects is basically going, okay, your monitor's lying to you. We'll help you not worry about that. And then all of a sudden you dig in, you're like, well, wait, but below that level what's going on.
Yeah.
And you can get lost.
It's true. And I think that actually contributes a little bit to the bad reputation that After Effects has in the VFX world, because flame artists and nuke artists live and breathe this stuff every day. And so you can make some really beautiful looking imagery in After Effects. In some ways, like way better than nuke or flame are prepared to do. Like, you want to talk simply about like particle stuff,
Yeah,
like
trap code.
and trap code, or even what is it, Starlight, or whatever that new one is, the one that like nuke and flame on their own are not going to do that, But when you make something and you hand it off to someone who's going to do the comping, and the colors aren't matched and they're not even legal, and in some ways they're blown out, like then the compositor looks back and go, this is a toy, and that's something that the reputation that After Effects has been trying to get away from for a long time.
But both sides are ignorant in that case. I just want to point out, I've worked with a bunch of nuke artists from like ILM who didn't actually really understand the pipeline either. It's just that you get trained, like, do this with your DPX files, then do this, and then you're good.
Yeah.
And it's like, I think the real problem is that if you want to make the bridge, you actually have to understand it. And that is really, really rare on both sides.
And that goes right back to your leveling up comment, because the people that get it become the problem solvers, and the problem solvers are hard to replace, and they're in high demand.
And I would say, just in this discussion, just with color spaces and things with After Effects, I feel like for so long it has been absent from the conversation as far as, well, artists, if you have 10 artists, each one of them is going to set up After Effects in a slightly different way. They're going to set up their renders in a slightly different way. And getting everything consistent is going to be a nightmare. But this is important. It's super important. There are ways to work linearly. You can get 32-bit working. The problem sometimes, the ecosystem that After Effects has created, you get you find yourself not being able to use several plugins, or you find yourself not being able to do certain things. You find inconsistencies, from artist to artist. Happily, we can now work in linear. You can see the proper additives and the proper responses that you should expect. That is possible. But I would say that it's missing from the conversation and from anyone's initial kind of jumping off point when they start to composite multiple images on top of each other, or when you're trying to get 3D passes to work properly to recreate a beauty or something like that. I think a lot of this color space, the initiation that you have with a nuke or a fusion artist versus an After Effects artist is completely different, and I would say is absent in the After Effects community. So learning what linear is and how to work in that space properly, setting up all of your renders properly, and getting yourself to be able to be in the proper setup from the start is so important with visual effects.
Yeah. Emphasis on the word start.
Yes.
I have seen people try to change from 16-bit to 32-bit linear in the middle of a project and watch all of their colors just go in opposite directions.
Right. Keys aren't even working.
You do it once, and you do it at the beginning, or you don't do it at all.
I mean, we have at our Swordfish here, we have Brendan Bowles, who's actually created the plugin for After Effects to take in EXRs to start off with. He developed it for After Effects and for ILM. We get in arguments every day, all day about color spaces and things. And from what I've learned from him is that, and correct me if I'm wrong, because I'd be getting this wrong, but essentially, when you are rendering 3D for the sake of something photoreal, and we need to have this respond properly in a linear way, so all your additives and your beauty passes and all of those can be rebuilt from the ground up. You want to be working in 32-bit, which is the only way that After Effects will actually be float. If you're in 16, it's still 0 to 1, even though you have all those values. You want to set up your settings typically with a 32-bit EXR or a 16-bit EXR. If you do have a 16-bit EXR half float, you still want to use it in a 32-bit environment in After Effects.
Yes, that's correct.
Linear.
Yeah.
And typically people don't do this, or they have some sort of mismatched. They may even render 32-bit, but they work in 16, which is 0 to 1, and 32-bit is 0 to infinity, or into the negatives as well.
Yeah, negative colors.
Yeah. So I think understanding some of this stuff, starting, from the very first initial setup and render, if you are respecting a linear color space workflow, you can get some beautiful imagery, and properly done. I would say the only compromise in After Effects is obviously we don't get some of the beautiful node-based workflows where we can have multiple mats plug into multiple things. There are some things here and there to help us with, but in general, it's more of a guerrilla style, which is fine. It's a guerrilla style workflow. And typically smaller shops can get away with some beautiful things. But yeah, we definitely have some jealousy with the Nuke folks and how you're able to manage your images.
A good trick is the compute transfer modes using 1.0 gamma checkbox. So even if you're working at just a 16-bit thing, like I a lot of times I turn that one on. That way, at least if I'm blending, I get something that replicates how it should work in linear, but doesn't make me dive fully in off the cliff into linear. There's a time and a place for everything.
Well, and the other, I'm going to step back here and say that, Adrian, you're working in a world where studios have committed to this pipeline and are going to solve the problems that come up with it.
Right.
And Anthony, you're working more in the world where training everyone to do this from the bottom to the top of the studio feels like really painful and like probably not worth the sacrifice because there's no time really. And at the end of the day, jobs are getting done. And honestly, training freelancers to deal with it in After Effects, if they're not used to it, is a whole other thing.
Yeah.
Yeah, it can be a problem. But you know what? I would also say, Mark, that for me, it's been a very satisfying part of my career. As I've gone from, I did this at the BYU broadcast company in New York, and at several shops out here where you do get the right project. You do get and I say the right project, I would say a project where the respect and the level of how you want to execute is respected by management and client. And the ability to take some of this knowledge to break down the pipeline, to set some standards and to have some templates and to have some starting points and to get everyone working based off of that process is incredibly satisfying, because when you're in that mode where you're establishing that as well as being able to define the creative, you're managing what makes your ideas consistent in the end. You have 10 different artists pumping out renders of something photoreal. And in the end, because people are kind of checking the boxes, and this does sound a little honky-dory, but it is incredibly satisfying to get several images back done by different artists and to have a general consistency. It can be done. It should be done. It needs to be done more. And I would say it's an ideal. But that type of process and mentality, I think, needs to be adopted on a higher level. I think for us motion designers that cross the threshold into VFX, for our community, the respect for color space and process and pipeline and consistency, if more emphasis was placed on that, I think we would all be leveling up and producing better work.
I think even as a one-man band, although it would be harder, but as a studio, you could decide to commit to raising that bar and do it. And it would be dangerous as a freelancer, and I've been in this position where if you start doing something in a proper linear space and then you hand it off, they're like, what the hell is this? Make it something I can use. So, and obviously if you're in a shop and you're the only one doing it, that's not going to work. So yeah, that's a great point. I love this discussion, by the way, because, there's this facetious question, do the tools matter? And kind of what we're saying is like, well, yes, in that skills matter. And so how you leverage these tools matters.
Exactly.
And where the tools get in your way, you're either having the skills to work with that, or you're moving on to the tool that's going to actually get you around that. But either way, it's really kind of that middle ground of how you're using them.
I think it's respecting the principles, and when a software package can't check the boxes, and if those boxes need to be checked, then maybe you need to move on. But for the most part, I feel like, the brick and mortar principle-based methodology, if that is respected first, then it doesn't matter what you use software-wise until you run out of options in that one software.
Mm-hmm.
And that has happened in the past in After Effects. But I feel like we're in a lot better setup today compared to 5-10 years ago.
Mm-hmm. Agreed.
For sure.
Agreed. Yeah.
So just to close it out, and I don't want to go super deep with this one, but it's more of a fun question. Like,
Yeah.
if somebody's like, okay, well, how do I future proof my career against these downsides we were talking about, and what's probably more likely going away, and what's on the horizon that would be really great to focus on? And I'm going to caveat that because there's a theme to what we're saying here too, which is don't do what somebody else wants, do what you want and make that the best you can because it's your thing. Don't do it because somebody else said, oh, Houdini is really the way to go. It's so much more powerful than Cinema 4D. Like, if you love working in cinema and you do amazing work in it, use that, right? So with all that caveat, what do you see on the horizon, over, let's say, the next, even 5 years, I think is pretty far to look in this day and age. Oof. Yeah. Who wants to jump in?
Well, I
would say Adrian.
Really? Oh, where I see things going in 5 years? Oh, it's a dark place, Mark. No, I think the most important thing is just never stop moving. I think that I go back to what I said earlier. Like, find the things that you like to do and continue to follow that thread to the next thing. And if your eyes are on doing, like, say you use Houdini as an example, and that's a good example, but like Houdini's sort of like taking over Maya and RealFlow and all those other simulation packages. And if you're deep into simulations and that's your jam, then absolutely go down the route of Houdini because that's what you like. But in a few years, something else is going to come along. And if you're more about the process than the package, meaning the software package, then your interest is going to lead you to whatever's going to replace Houdini before anybody else knows what's going to replace Houdini. But know that you're never going to reach the threshold in your career where you can stop. And I think that there's a bit of not to downplay anything that's happening on like the Flame side, but I know that there are a lot of Flame artists that, when Nuke came out, they were like, nope, I know Flame, and now they're finding, their opportunities are drying up because they chose not to evolve. And that's sort of a larger issue industry wide, but even on a lower, smaller After Effects scale, just like if you're really good at like jamming on awesome, cool techniques, just know that technique will, in a few years, is probably going to be a plugin, right? And then everybody's going to be able to do it. So I think that that just keeping current on trends and always be experimenting and always be playing is going to help. And then while we talk about leveling up, there's this very good anecdote that I always come back to from my own career. I read it in an issue of Cinefex, and it kind of has a lot to do with sort of the perception of leveling up and getting better. In the issue, they were talking about to one of the effects designers for Empire Strikes Back. And they were talking about how, you've worked on Star Wars and now you've worked on Empire Strikes Back and now you're going to be working on the third one. And you must feel like you're getting these systems and methodologies down pat. And you must feel like you're becoming sort of like a master or expert of this. These effects must be becoming very easy to you. And the guy said something interesting. He was like, I don't want to look at doing this from the standpoint of becoming like an expert in anything. He's like, I'd rather sort of keep this mentality of being a perpetual amateur. And he went on to explain that when you approach things with the mindset of an amateur, you leave yourself open to be able to learn more, to continue to learn, to continue to be inspired and awed and challenged. And that drives you to move forward. And he said, when you look at yourself as sort of a master or an expert in anything, you're sort of like cutting yourself off from new input and new stimulus and basically saying, I can't learn anything else. And I thought that interesting for a couple of reasons. Number one, here you are, someone who's working on one of the premiere effects films, still feeling and frequent and quite openly admitting he will always have more to learn. And as I've been in this industry for, almost 20 years, I still try to keep that in my own mind that, we work in an industry that is constantly changing, constantly shifting. And to ever get to the point where you are saying to yourself, hey, I know it all, I'm sort of a master at anything, it's actually kind of dangerous because, you're basically setting yourself in your ways and telling yourself, there is no need for me to change anything that I'm doing or learn anything new. And as we talk about people who are just starting their careers and looking to level up and grow and follow the things that inspire them and follow the things that challenge them and interest them, know that is a lifelong and career-long process that is every bit as relevant to someone who has been around for a long time as it is to just starting out. I put that in here just because it's a really good story, but it's also a very grounding one. Secondly, don't be, just as you're starting out your career and you're not necessarily content to, be making the coffee for people. Once you get onto a point where you're animating, don't be content to just be a cog in the greater machine. Like follow the path, see where it goes, work your way up, seek higher ground. Eventually, and it will happen on every level of this industry. It is the lowest hanging fruit, or the lowest, sea level will swallow. Yeah, sea levels are rising, right? Globally, they are too. Don't buy beachfront property where where the water's going to come up and claim you. Even in the realm of 360 video, anybody that decided they were going to hang their hat on stitching 360 video a couple years ago is in deep trouble now because the computers can figure that out. So,
right. And what a good time they were having, huh?
They were making a lot of money, but now they're not making a lot of money anymore.
Right.
And I also think that the type of artists that I find to be very successful are the ones that actually have really good client-facing skills and are really good in meetings and are really, I find that those are wherever you can put your own mark on the work you're doing, be it in your aesthetic style or in how you present or in how you pitch or in how you argue for, the choices you've made. Those are the people that tend to stick around a lot longer, as opposed to the people that just keep their head down, do their work and go home.
Yeah, I mean, the G-Monks of the world spend more than half of their time just doing personal exploration and that type of work. And that just, to somebody who's in the trenches, is like, well, come on. I mean, that's like saying, well, if I just sat on the beach on Hawaii more, I'd be more relaxed and more open-minded. But it's a kind of a chicken and egg thing. And a lot of us have found anytime you do step back and do refocus on your own interests and producing what comes out of those, it really tends to pay off, right? And not to mention also the emotional intelligence and communication skills you're talking about, which sadly, I don't know if they're more rare in our business or they're just more important in our business, but it's harder to get away without those. If people don't want you around, they're probably going to try to find a way to not work with you, even if you have something really valuable.
Yeah. And I think that one of the things that inadvertently pushed me up the chain a little bit was because I don't know, I go back to the fact that I was an English major in college, so I wrote a lot of papers. So I would write treatment documents or hey, these are my session notes and this is why I chose to do this. And then the producers would be like, we're getting on a call with the clients. You want to just come in and say what you just wrote because, that's going to be better than anything I say. And then suddenly I was finding myself on the conference calls. And then they were like, we need someone to go to set. You've already talked to these guys. Like, you're going to explain what needs to be done. Go. We are in the business of creating communication, right? It's visual communication, but there's also a very important interpersonal communication component to this job as well. And, the good communicators are hard to come by as well. If you're just sitting there with your face on your screen, that's not necessarily going to advance you once you're 5, 10, 15 years into your career, especially when, there's a fresh cachet of young folk coming up behind you.
I feel like just personally for myself, looking at the next 5 years or so, how do I maintain a steady progression and how do I stay fresh? I think is part of what I want to ask myself. With what we do, we can easily burn out. And I feel like we do need to stay in a growth and learning phase, even in our maintenance years. For me, learning about photography, learning about music, learning about editing, learning about all these different areas and facets of what we do, design, art. For me, as I kind of jump from one discipline to the next on the side, that's like a refreshing input in my life. Whether I'm my dad has a band, sometimes I go out and I'll shoot him and do video and edit that. I'm always learning, and I have a side band that we have a yacht rock cover band.
I can see it.
I'm always recording.
You got the beard.
Oh yeah, we all wear mustaches and we go crazy playing George Michael's doing the sexy sax man. You've got to find side disciplines that kind of push you and keep things fresh, but also like playing music or going and recording your dad's band or learning more tutorials and doing side passion projects on the side, going off to conventions. I just went to the MoGraph camp up in Vermont last month, which was absolutely amazing. Going to NABs and SIGGRAPHs, getting yourself with different inputs, different disciplines, and different ways to re-enliven and keep yourself fresh and motivated and see what other people are doing is very important, because I feel there are times where you go, man, I'm just burnt. It's a taxing lifestyle, but I think there's plenty of room to reinvigorate a lot of the interests that you have to keep yourself fresh. And I would say that for the next 5 years, as I continue to do that, that would be a really good, I think, baseline. And then personally, one thing that I would say is as we're looking towards the next 5 years, I do a lot of weekly reviews where I will in a nutshell, my format is like, what are 3 successes and what are 3 challenges personally and professionally? And what are any lessons or thoughts going forward? But as I continue to intermittently do these weekly or maybe bi-monthly reviews, it gives you a chance to look at some of the goals that you had set up maybe at the beginning of the year or a few years ago or whenever, of where you want to go, where you want to be. And it gives you a good chance to be able to reflect and have some clarity on actually how far you have come or what you would like to tweak and what your challenges were. And learning from your own self and seeing, okay, this week, I want to focus on this a little bit more, but having moments of clarity in doing some sort of personal review of some sort as we're moving through this career is super, super helpful. So yeah, my 2 in a nutshell, it's like finding ways to stay fresh, doing stuff on the side, and having moments of clarity where you can write things down, get things down. Like when you write something down, you take all of your thoughts and all the chaos of what's happened, because you have all these thoughts on where you'd like to go with your career. But when you start writing it down, it's like one idea, one thought at a time. And it's amazing how much you learn from yourself as you reflect on that. And that's, at least for me in my career so far, been a major way for me to have a base and a clarity to where I'd like to go and what's wrong now and what do I want to fix, and actually putting words to it.
So in a deliberate way, taking a step back at regular intervals. That's great. Mm-hmm. Yeah, cool. Awesome. Well, man, this has been such a great conversation. I mean, I'm just happy we had it, and I'm really happy that other people get to listen to it. I mean, I learned a lot, and I think you both have really great insights, like just ways of looking at this stuff. So thank you for sharing that.
Yeah, you bet. Thanks for having us.
Thanks for having us. This has been a lot of fun. Really loved it.
I loved this conversation. And beforehand was only worried it might dwell too much in negative territory. Instead, I found myself inspired by the frank realness of the discussion, and behind it, the real passion for this work, as well as thriving as a professional artist by maintaining, among other things, beginner's mind. It's exciting to look at everything that is challenging and even sometimes wrong and imbalanced in our industry, and reframing it to where you can take control of the process, even a little bit. I'm inspired by these strategies to find not only balance, but even inspiration. And I really hope you found that in this discussion as well. As always, thanks for listening.